Well, today we're going to turn from the Italian Renaissance to the Northern Renaissance. And notice that I put Northern Renaissance in quotation marks. It's because it's not at all clear that there really was a Northern Renaissance. Of course, there was art taking place in Northern Europe during the Italian Renaissance, but scholars are divided on whether to call this work Northern Renaissance or not. Because the Italians, and we've been in a very Italian world for a long time, and if you've gotten used to those sort of Italian idealism and the philosophy that goes along with it, and now we need to kind of wipe that away with our eraser and look at things that are happening at the same time. We're going to look at two artists from the hinterlands, Hieronymus Bosch, a Netherlandish artist, and then Matthias Grunewald, a northern German artist. And both of these artists, their reputation did not really outlive them by very long, except in very small circles. And their work really came to the fore in the 20th century because the strange subject matter, the odd expressionistic distortions that take place in some of these Northern Renaissance artists are not only do they not look a Renaissance at all, but they really remind us of 20th century modern art, expressionism, surrealism, and so forth. And as we began to develop a new aesthetic in early 20th century modernism around 100 years ago in the 1920s, we then began to look back at art history and revive artists who had long been neglected or relegated to the dustbins of history. So with that, disclaimer to begin, we're going to do for the next 3 weeks the Northern Renaissance or what happens in the North during the Renaissance in Italy, topped off by a very strange phenomenon, mannerism, international mannerism. So that's what's going to occupy us for the next several weeks. All right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the North. Well, we're talking about Germanic peoples and Netherlandish peoples, but we don't have a Germany. There is no Germany, just like there's no Italy, right? It's a number of little nation states, and they're all organized under the auspices called the Holy Roman Empire, which I guess is sort of loosely based in Nuremberg, kind of right in the very center. And you notice that this takes in Denmark, nowadays parts of what is now Poland, but also all of Austria and all of Switzerland. Here are the Alps, and it even extends into northern Italy. And it was during the early Renaissance that the Germanic Duke of Tuscany was thrust from the ducal throne and replaced by the democracy or the Republic of Florence. Okay, so the Holy Roman Empire is the Germanic lands north of the Alps, and we're going to be looking at these two artists. The first is from the Netherlands, was a land that is no longer there called Flanders. And they spoke Flemish, which is very close to modern Dutch. This area was in the north, not part of this Germanic empire, but this strip here, which also included, besides the Netherlands and what is modern Belgium, also the Duchy of Burgundy, where they have that wonderful wine in here, which is now France. And all of these areas in this green area were under the auspices of the King of Spain. And so many of Bosch's paintings, for example, are found not in the Netherlands, but in Spain. And so we're going to look at these lands controlled by Spain. Hieronymus Bosch is truly from the hinterlands, and his work, very unlike the Renaissance idealism, which had the idea implicit in it of the perfectibility of human beings through the presentation of beauty and trying to define what is the wisdom that's incarnate in the mind of God and put that forth. And even though they realized that human beings are flawed, nonetheless, it was a very positive, very optimistic viewpoint of humanity's destiny, despite its foibles. This more optimistic um, philosophy did not hold at all in the northern lands. They were still in the grip of that very medieval kind of Christianity that held that human beings are hopelessly flawed because of original sin, because of the fruit that Adam ate. Humans are now tainted by this propensity to sin and to folly, which, if left to their own devices, will result in depravity and sinking lower and lower and more animalistic. Only through the intervention of the church can humankind be saved from its own self-destruction and folly because of the nature of human beings. And so this very pessimistic view, which also held in Italy, in some of the hinterlands in Italy, and of course in the Middle Ages, this very despondent view of human potential is very evident in the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch, who seems to specialize in showing us the folly of human beings. For example, in this small painting of a conjurer or a magician, a street magician. He may be doing some sort of gambling bet here with his little ball and his little things on the table. You can see behind him there are a number of observers, some of them high blown, like a woman with a feather in her hat, others more kind of ordinary people, shopkeepers, laborers, and so forth, dressed in these medieval costumes of the time of Northern Europe. And here the magician does this, and this man leans over. He's probably invested a few coins in trying to figure out where this ball is going to be. And he looks very, very carefully at this conjurer. But while he's doing it, the conjurer's son around the back, I don't know where my arrow is here. Here's my arrow here, and you can see that same kind of hook nose here. He, while looking up like, you know, he is lifting the purse of the incredulous gambler. And so shows us kind of the folly of humankind. That left to our own devices, we are given to our various vices. And these were considered an offshoot of original sin, that we had a propensity to gamble and to drink too much and to eat too much and to desire sex too much and all those other things. So things basically that felt good, like drinking wine, right? Having sex, eating food. These things were suspect because the human appetites were considered part of this fallen nature of humankind. So to follow any of those pleasures was to be following in the devil's footsteps, leading ultimately to your own damnation and your own, giving it to folly. So here, with a sort of humorous take on it, it's nonetheless very pessimistic view of human nature. Here's another where a barber who also was what would apply various devices to bleed people. This was considered, if there's something sick, it probably bad blood, so they would drain blood, either with leeches or by making an incision and draining the blood. And of course, what this did is that when you lose a certain amount of blood, and anybody that's ever donated blood knows this, you get a sort of lightheaded feeling afterwards. And so that's why they always give you lots of sugar and cookies and apple juice and stuff like that to get your blood sugar back up so that you don't lose that energy. And what it is that when your blood is low, your body believes that you're dying, you're bleeding to death. And so it kicks in all this adrenaline and you have this this burst of energy. And that is, I guess, what people looking for that kind of burst of adrenaline is what they saw as the sort of cure that went along with bleeding. This is removing the stone, and there's some sort of idea that the stone that caused madness somewhere in the scalp, some bump in the forehead that caused it. And here a barber, tries to extract it surgically while the man is awake. I guess he's probably had some drink to try to dull the pain. But the victim or the patient, I guess, however you think of it, looks right at us kind of incredulously, like, well, what should I do? Whereas the priest next to him with a big tankard of beer seems to say, well, that's exactly what you should be doing, taking out that bad stone. And the nun seems equally idiotic. Instead of reading the book, whatever it is, the Bible or maybe a medical book, she puts it on her head as if it's a hat. And with a very stupefied expression, sort of looks on at this medical procedure. He puts a funnel on the head of the barber to indicate the folly of it, the silliness, the ridiculousness of having a hat like that. Signifies the ridiculousness of this surgeon and his supposed procedure for ending madness. Now, the reason I think he appeals to 20th century people so much are drawings like this. And this one is called "The Forest Has Eyes and Ears." And I suppose he meant that you have to be careful what you do and say, because you never know who's going to be listening. All the way from servants, nosy servants pretending to clean while they're listening to your things and gossiping, or really bad people in the woods, or even there's ghosts and witches and hobgoblins in the woods. And that's what it is here when he says the forest has eyes and ears. It's a saying, but here he takes it literally and puts these human eyes in the ground. They look almost like pebbles at first. And if I can get my arrow going, they're down here, these eyes that look at us. And also, if you look at the woods, the forests behind, giant ears are poised, listening there in the woods. And this dead tree, the forest in the background is flourishing, but the tree in the foreground is dead. And in the hollow of the tree is an owl. And an owl has changed its symbolism from the time of Bosch to our time. We think of the owl as wise. That was not the meaning of the owl. The meaning of the owl was the devil. It meant temptation. It meant giving in to vices. And I suppose it's because the owl is a nocturnal creature. He sleeps during the day and comes out at night. And then he's a silent killer because he has wings that, he can swoop in on prey and that you never hear it. And so this, he had a kind of a demonic, a dark, sinister, sneaky, silent kind of a thing, and a sort of wisdom, but an evil genius, sort of. And you can see here he hides in the hollow of this dead tree, which is also preyed on by a woodpecker and other forest birds. So, but the owl is the one who's hidden away in that hollow. And if you didn't know better, and I was just shown this on my PhD exam, I might guess this was some Belgian surrealist from the 1930s, because it's that close. It also does recall, of course, directly Goya, the great Spanish romantic from the early 19th century. Now, if we look at Flemish art from the 1400s, from the early Renaissance, and the period of the early Renaissance in Italy, the time of Fra Angelico and Masaccio and Brunelleschi, we have in the north Jan van Eyck. And we talked about Van Eyck because he is credited with the invention of oil paint technique. Oil paint had been known for centuries, but he was the first to apply it in these beautiful transparent layers of glaze, one over another, transparent layers of colored glaze, so that the colors from underneath seem to glow through with this wonderful realism. And you weren't able to see any brush strokes at all. It was just laid on, a lot of it laid on, not even with brushes, but with fingers, with thumbs, rubbed and so forth, as you did layer upon layer upon layer. And you can see this very rich kind of evocation of realism, the thickness and heaviness of the material of the woman's dress, the fine, soft fur that lines the coat of this wealthy banker gentleman. But also beyond this beautiful surface realism, we also have these symbols. The dog symbolizes fidelity. The oranges on the windowsill represent both the Medici family and also also fruitfulness that we hope, because these are a married couple. Also the little broom hanging from the bed, and the bed itself signifies her kind of wifely duties in the way that people thought of things. And this is a Netherlandish painting from that period. It hangs in the National Gallery in London. This is the early marriage. This is 1435, 1440, something like that. Here we're looking at the next generation. And Hieronymus Bosch is really the same generation as Leonardo da Vinci. We're not sure exactly when he was born, but right around the same time, in the mid-century. And here is a panel from a triptych, parts of a polyptych of a many-paneled painting. And this is a part that we do have, and it's called Death and the Miser. And I wanted to kind of lead you through the story because it does have a moral to it. It is a highly kind of moralistic story. The miser is on his deathbed. And we switch to earlier life at the foot of his bed. I suppose he's recalling this in his mind in his last moments of him putting away money, putting away treasures on the earth. And notice that in this treasure chest that has a very large lock and a key on it, he's the only one that has access to this. Notice the kind of strange little mouse creature that holds up the bag and helps him do it. This signifies the dark, sinister forces of the vices and the devils and the demons that inhabit the world of the imagination of his time. He is a religious man because he does have his rosary beads. So we know that he's devout, a good Catholic. There were no Protestants. And that he probably gave money to the church and so forth, and seems to be a good man. But the gospel says that you shouldn't save up treasures on earth, but rather in your heavenly kingdom, because you can't take it with you. Those aren't the exact words of scripture, but something to that effect. And you notice that death peeks in through the door unexpectedly while the miser is dead, and he has an arrow that is death itself. And the miser is startled in his bed. An angel appears invoking God, looking upward, gesturing toward God, toward the miser, that he would accept in these final moments the inevitability of his own mortality, and the fact that all his material wealth will count as nothing in the world of the beyond, in their imagination. However, on the other hand, we have this little horrible frog-toad creature holding up a money bag as if to say, well, you'll need this in your trip, right? One last temptation. And this is really the moment of truth for the miser. Will he be saved or will he be damned? Everything hangs in the balance right here, this moral dilemma. So it's a very moralizing, didactic painting that's trying to teach you, don't save up treasures on the earth, because you're an old man, you'll regret it and you can't take it with you. Only heavenly rewards await those who are righteous. And so that's the moral of the story. I wanted to digress from the moral of the story, however, for a moment, to look at the unusual technique. Because when we do a blow up, and this is larger, but the image you see on your screen is probably bigger than the painting itself. It's a small painting. But you can see here that the shading has been indicated with what looks like a pen, these little hatch marks of a pen. It looks almost more like a colored drawing than what we would really consider a painting, especially in terms of Flemish art. Now, it is an oil painting, so that the marks may well have been in oil, but they might have also been ink. I'm not sure. But you can see the color drawing kind of aspects of this. He doesn't really apply layers and layers of glaze. He does the underdrawing and then he colors it in, and that's pretty much it. We can see this also in the detail of the miser when we see his clothing there. It's beautifully done. It looks like there's kind of a pink or an orange underpainting to everything. You can see it here in the bedspread. You can see it here in the chest. You can see it a little bit under here, under the green. So he is using some very light glazes, but it doesn't have that rich, incredible verisimilitude and soft texture. Just look at the ermine. Look at the ermine thing. I don't know why I'm having a. I'm sorry. I had a phone call come in, it looked like. Yeah, notice the difference. Now, this is not parallel between the early Renaissance and the high Renaissance, between a Botticelli, let's say, and a Leonardo or a Michelangelo or Raphael. We don't see that sort of progression from early to later. We see, if anything, a sort of parallelism. He knows about oil paint. He uses it in a sort of fast, cursory manner. And that's all there is to it as far as the technique goes. And so he was never hailed as a great technical master, and he had very, very little, if any, influence on Southern art, in Italian art. Whereas Van Eyck, as addicted as he is to beautiful detail and textures and surface realism, that oil painting technique would be absorbed by the Italians and worked into the high Renaissance. Here, it doesn't really lead to anything. And this is why it's called the Northern Renaissance, because really in Italy, they really had a very self-conscious idea that they were breaking with the Gothic past, and they were going back 1,000 years through the Dark Ages, back to the glories of ancient Rome, early Christian Rome of 400, before the fall of Rome. And there was no such historical sensibility among someone like Bosch. He was another painter doing things that wasn't particularly related to early work, other than he absorbed the oil paint technique in a cursory sort of way. He's a great painter, but you can see where he would be considered backward in some ways. I wanted to point out too here, this little demon with I think he's a demon, dressed as a Dominican monk who were in charge of the Inquisition. And he sort of waits impatiently for the miser to make up his mind whether he's saved or damned, because if he's damned, then he gets the stuff. The knight, I guess this must have been a knighted person. So he gets those kind of trophies of his conquest of this human soul. So it was a very moralizing universe and a very medieval universe. There's no redemptive incarnational kind of idea that we had in Italy. But remember, Italy, besides having the Greeks and Romans, it also had St. Francis of Assisi. And St. Francis did a lot of things by acknowledging human folly, but at the same time, humans are made in the image of God. And so we have to aspire toward that. And all of nature was seen by St. Francis as a kind of incarnation of God, brother sun, sister moon, mother earth, sister water, brother fire, brother wolf, so forth, so on. All of it was good, all of it was, but this is very different than this more medieval idea of human nature as fatally flawed. And so that all of the instincts, all of the pleasures that human beings are naturally drawn to, that is at the same time their downfall. Now, here is a part of some of these polyptychs that are made of many different panels that are hinged together have through the centuries been taken apart and cut to fit frames and all sorts of things. And this is the reverse side of a triptych when it was closed. And you can't see it, but there's a seam in the middle. This is actually a reconstruction because the two halves are in different places, because the things on the other side are the things that have been collected. But through the miracle of Photoshop, we can bring those two sections of this together. And we can see here the idea, before you open it up, of the theme of the wanderer, of the Christian pilgrim as the human being as on a journey, like a pilgrim. And a pilgrims during the Middle Ages would go to relics, to the bones of St. James, the scarf of the Virgin Mary, the hand of an apostle who healed with his hands. Those sort of things were popular items of devotion. And typically in the Middle Ages, pilgrims, even peasants, would be given leave by their by the landlord, to leave to go on pilgrimage. And so this was a beginning of getting out of that, very local, feudalistic world that was the world of the Middle Ages. And so the pilgrim, the wanderer, was seen not only as someone who goes on actual pilgrimage and brings back a souvenir or a little holy something, little picture or something, but also that the whole of life is like a pilgrimage, that we're going for this relic, we're going for the icon, we're going for the holy thing at the end. But along the way, we meet all sorts of temptations, because the world was not seen as this beautiful palace of brother, sun, and sister moon that Francis was talking about. Instead, it was seen as a vale of tears, as a place of temptation and sorrow and idle pleasures that lead to nowhere except damnation. And so this is, again, a stern moral warning about the direction that the pilgrim should go. And so he's shown here in the very center as a poor man. He has ripped clothes. He seems to have one leg is injured. He has a slipper on one foot. One foot he has a boot, the other only a slipper, the injured leg. And he has a backpack on his back, and I guess that's everything that he basically owns in the world. So the way that we take along our whole world, our life, our job, or so that's what the backpack represents. He's a pilgrim on the earth. He's not really of the earth. His destiny is heaven. So he must beware of the vices that lay in store for him in this picture. If we look in the background, we can see that in the background, there's all sorts of bad things happening. Man looks like he's making a pass at a woman, probably not his wife. This is probably a house of ill repute. Notice the beer barrel out in front. The bird cage represents the sort of sheltered life of the prostitutes. Over here, pigs and little piglets eagerly eat up their slop, right? And he's suggesting that humans are pig-like, that there's this animalistic thing that draws us to vices like adultery and premarital sex and all these sorts of other things. Here a man urinates, doesn't realize he's being watched. The caged birds, alternate with the free birds here. The free birds are more like the wanderer that, is tempted by these things, but in the end moves along. He is armed in a way because he does have a knife, but he doesn't have a sword. So I feel like the knife is really much more for utility, that he needs a knife in his travels to open up things and so forth. And it could also be used for defense, but he's not an armed man. He's not a soldier. He's not that kind of a pilgrim. he's a poor pilgrim wandering through the earth. And notice that the dog in the background, which is a symbol of fidelity, usually, here growls at him and hunches down as if he were an unwelcome stranger. And it is true that the pilgrim seems to leave behind him those more rough, more animalistic aspects of his life. Another part of the, oh, and I wanted to show you too, I guess here, that where he's going is not all that promising either, because the gate is closed and locked. And beyond it, we have cows and so forth. So the path leads through a closed door, and he'll have to figure out a way of getting beyond these impediments to continue his journey through the Vale of Tears to his ultimate redemption at the end. It's a moving painting. Notice, however, that even though it's in oil paint, it's all alla prima. It's not with a lot of different glazes. It's directly worked, but also that there is no perspective, and that shouldn't surprise us. In Van Eyck, none of those guys got perspective, really. And so you notice that the distance between the pigs and the dog is very unclear. He seems way too big for the dog being that far back. He's also out of proportion to the gate and the cow. All of it, I mean, they realize that as things get farther away, they get smaller. But on the other hand, they don't have a mathematical system of linear perspective that the Italians had mastered by then, but which was a trade secret. And what would Bosch know of Italy? Another part of this polyptych, and then the central panel is gone. We don't know what it was. But on the back of one of the halves of that pilgrim is the Ship of Fools. And here is a ship of people, a friar with his tonsured head and a nun playing music. The cherries represent illicit sexuality. So there's probably something between this priest and this nun, a carnal kind of temptation. They seem to bite a pancake. There's some sort of a folk tradition of a couple and their marriage biting out of the same pancake kind of a thing. So that's, we think, what's going on. It looks almost like they're singing to a microphone or something, but they're not. They're all trying to bite the pancake. And they're surrounded by like naked people in the water. This woman with her drunken husband wakes him up. There is no rudder on the boat, so it just floats wherever it wants to. Instead of a sail, it has a cut off part of a tree. And we notice in the tree, there's someone climbing up the tree. There's a fat roasted goose tied to the tree, and it's just grafted off and placed. And up here is this owl. At first, it almost looks like a person or like someone from Carnival with a mask, but it's an owl, you can see. And so he represents that dark, sinister, demonic temptation of the whole thing. And notice what a central part the church plays in this whole dance of death, this whole ship of fools going to damnation. The central figures are a priest and a nun who don't seem to have any sense of morality. And this ship is headed for eternal damnation. Now, isn't Bosch interesting? Now, his great masterpiece is this triptych, and the whole thing exists, and it's in the Prado in Spain. And it's called The Garden of Earthly Delights. And this is the closed position. A lot of these altarpieces had different wings that open. So these are wings, and it's in its closed or clasped position. And here we have primordial earth before the creation of human beings. And and this is actually the way the book of Genesis describes it, that a firmament or a dome in the midst of the waters that separates the waters below the sea from the waters above, because the blue sky was considered also to be water. And if I can get close, we can see that as we get to the periphery of this flat world, kind of strange creatures begin to populate it as we get farther and farther away from Flanders. Now up in heaven, there's God, God the Father, with his law, with his 10 commandments already there in his mind. And he says up there those words that he spoke and it was made. He spoke and it was so. And so he says, let there be light, and there's light. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, separate the waters from the waters, and it was so. Let dry land appear, let there be, and so forth. And so that this recreates that world, and this is really the way they considered the world. This is before Copernicus. So they considered the world to be the center of the universe, and the sun, moon, and stars floated around the world. And here it almost looks like an alchemist's jar, an alchemist's sealed thing, because it was the alchemist, this precursor to chemistry, where they tried to create the elixir of life that would keep you alive forever and would have the powers to transmute lead into gold. And so this is what they were searching for. Now, in this closed and latched position, it shows the world before the entry of humans with human folly. And everything seems to be in order. It's interesting, he paints it entirely in grisaille, in grays, to give an idea of how much more colorful it all becomes when it is flung open and we see the three-part triptych. So on the left side, we see the Garden of Eden, that is before the fall of man. The center is usually interpreted as our contemporary times, a time of folly and sin and giving into temptations. And on the right panel representing the inevitable end to such dissipation in the fire and brimstone of hell. Let's start with the left panel, the Garden of Eden. There we see that in the background, the animals all exist in harmony. The birds are flying together, animals don't hunt each other. The lion down here is right with the unicorns, and they seem to be able to coexist very easily and without any harm. He even includes the very eccentric but known animals, the giraffe and the elephant that come all the way from Africa. So he's showing us a world as he imagines it to be before the entry of humankind. And then below, we have the creation. We believe it's showing the creation of Adam and Eve, but more specifically Eve, who is taken from the side of Adam. And Adam in Hebrew means earth, because he is made from the earth. On the side, we see the tree of temptation, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a very weird cactus-like thing. And Adam looks longingly at Eve. God is represented as Christ, as not as the Word, as the incarnate Word, as Christ. And he looks at us, he looks directly at us. Adam looks at Eve, Eve has downcast eyes. But this is the beginning of temptation. Even though they haven't eaten the fruit, it seems already with the creation of woman begins all sorts of strange aberrations. Down here, a bird eats a frog. All we see are the feet of the frog. Over here, a cat pounces on some sort of lizard and carries it away. Here, some strange mutant of a bird has 3 heads and 3 wings at the same time. So these strange anomalies are already happening. And then, as if to hint at reproduction, back here are rabbits just to the side of Eve. So even though she looks innocent, it seems that she is the occasion of temptation for Adam and the fall of humankind. And it begins even before the eating of the apple. Now in the center is our present day, the folly of following our own desires, and that our own desires lead inevitably to damnation and death because they're folly. These things, and this is maybe 4 by 4 feet. And when you're in front of it, I brought a magnifying glass that they let me use as long as you get too close to it, because it's so rich with these crazy, crazy details. So I'm going to go into the painting. We're going to start at the very, very back, these strange kind of weird hybrid, almost buildings or castles. And here a bunch of, everyone's naked. The naked people come out of this crack in the rock. A mermaid in the middle distance seems to be making love with a man. Others climb out naked into some sort of a shell, while another group of people sit around a gigantic strawberry munching on it. And the strawberry reappears over and over. And this is the fruit of temptation. This is the forbidden fruit. Then here, all this frolicking goes on of the dissipated life of the revelers. Here we see, naked people with sexually making sexual advances to each other. Here, a black man, an African, they knew what Africans were. There was trade with Africa and so forth. There were some Africans even living in Europe. And so they do that, and here another African is in the boat. Fruits kind of abound everywhere. In the very center of the composition is a pool, a round pool, and naked women are in the pool, and surrounding them is this parade of men and fantastical wild beasts. And the naked men dance around and ride these beasts. Again, here, this chimera, these fantastical creatures and leading, and all these sort of intimations of pleasures, many of them sexual. Here, this flower spills its seed, as a reference to the evils, I guess, of masturbation. Here, a man seems to pluck flowers out of another man's rear end. Another carries a gigantic fish. Here, a bird seems to feed as if it's his tiny young bird. He feeds little cherries, while other voluptuous women have giant cherries on their heads, almost as if they're hats, including this exotic black woman with a gigantic cherry on her head. Other creatures, part human, part animal, like this ominous owl creature that haunts things. Here in the lake, all sorts of strange occurrences happen. A man and a wife in some sort of a giant bubble. The man dark, the woman very light. She seems to almost push him away in some ways. It's not a sensual sort of meeting. Another man, the fruit at his crotch just explodes, and out comes birds and various different things. Over here, a man's hidden in almost like a submarine, and like a little glass jar, a rat runs in. What these people are exactly doing is unclear, but it's clear where it leads, and that's to this final panel. All hell is full of fires and darkness in the background. People go on this fiery sea. Below them, all sorts of phantasmagoria exist. And if we look here, we see if you take the gaze of Adam looking at Eve, it creates a trajectory that leads us right here to this figure, the tree man, it's sometimes called. He seems to have kind of a hat that includes bagpipes on it and strange birds dancing around. He seems almost to be mooning us, bending over and mooning, but his legs are tree trunks that have sort of ships, boats for shoes. Other people are inside this egg-like thing. So, and then other things, ears with giant knives, skull of a cow, people trapped in keys. Over here, giant people being swallowed through with swords, being hung from trees, being forced to crawl through these tight spaces. Below, musical instruments, which were thought to be very bad, because musical instruments represent, pleasure and harmony, and these things are forbidden. They're the devil's bagpipes, and pretty soon you start doing this, and next thing you're playing cards, and who knows where it will all end in this dissipation of Adamic original sin. Here, people seem to be almost crucified on harps, they dangle from instruments. This is a sham here, almost like a rocket ship or something. Here, some sort of a devil eats people and then defecates them into this weird outhouse. And here a man vomits into it. And you can see people down there. Someone else, they defecate coins. Well, over here to the left is a woman being made love to by some sort of a black demonic rabbit creature while she gazes into a mirror, lost in her own vanity. So these paintings, they're just rich with these little things. Here, a nun pig tries to get an elderly man to sign away his worldly goods to the church. She doesn't have good intentions at all, but she's just a pig. She just wants the money. Here, this some sort of a creature with a knight's helmet, but along a beak that sticks out of it. And then ominously, a foot with the bone still sticking out of it, dangling like a trophy from the thing. So it's a really incredible painting, and I've taken way too long on it. But I want to point out some of the problems with it too, is because if it's an altarpiece, there's never ever been any altarpiece like this, because in the altarpiece, the central panel has a noble theme, a crucifixion, the birth of Jesus, the martyrdom of a saint, the resurrection of Mary, different themes like that, not the dissipation of the sinful. And so what sort of a thing could this almost be that would be? And there was actually a theory that came out in the 60s that maybe these were an altar to this heretical sect called the Adamites, who wanted to go back to return to the Garden of Eden, to the innocence, and they used sex as a way of showing their pre-Adamic, their cast off original sin, and celebrate life with these things. So this was seen perhaps as a celebration. I don't buy it, and most art historians don't buy it either, because then what's Garden of Eden and what hell doing there if this is just a celebration? It seems more like it's a warning in the form of an altarpiece, and in the end it closes up and we can put Pandora's box back. I wanted to show you just a couple things, and we got to move into Matthias Grunewald, but these are some panels that are now in Venice. And they're a diptych, and they're two-sided, so we're seeing the whole thing. One side is hell, the other side is heaven. But I want to just point out this detail, which is surprisingly similar, to those descriptions of near-death people who see a tunnel and a light and so forth. And here, angels bear souls up to heaven, and they approach God, I guess, through this tunnel with this light and angels in the background. It's a very evocative depiction. I want to just point out too, Max Ernst in the 20th century he's a surrealist, and this is from the early 30s, I think 32. It's an illustration from a surrealist novel called The Week of Kindness. And I did want to point out, this is very much out of Bosch. And so you can see that a mindset that's beginning to appreciate these strange dreamlike images in the surrealist mind, all to do with Freud and the unconscious and so forth. And here Picasso's from 1936, Minotauromachy, the reign of minotaurs, and here the minotaur, the bull-headed man, symbol of the unconscious desires of the id, comes forward. There's a little girl there's just a match. And it's enough because he's a creature of the darkness, and very much also a reflection of the troubled homeland of Picasso, and especially his beloved Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War when fascism took over. So I'm just showing you, and this is a preview for later on. We're going to tackle the 20th century, which has very interesting people. But you could see in the midst of these sorts of surrealistic ideas, someone like Bosch now becomes interesting once again. Matthias Grunewald is now a German artist, again, pre-Reformation, and also has a very dark view of humankind. There aren't many works by Grunewald, but his big masterpiece makes up for everything else, and it is the Isenheim altarpiece. And it's epileptic with several different stages, and the central figure is this crucifixion. It is now in Colmar, near where Isenheim, and it was the cult image of a monastery that had a hospital, and the hospital or a hostel that treated people with a skin disease called St. Anthony's Fire, which was ergot poisoning. Ergot is a parasite, a mold that gets into rye and different types of grain. And if you don't process the grain right, you can get poisoned with it, and it causes hallucinations. This another theory about Bosch was that ergot caused him to hallucinate. The Isenheimer, I wanted to get you a sense of the scale of the piece, because it's a magnificent scale, and I have seen it. And it is one of the most wondrous pieces of artwork I've ever seen. It's deeply moving. Obviously, we do not have the Italian Renaissance idealization, but this is the same time that Raphael is doing his work in 1510, 1515. And in the central panel, of course, we have one of the most horrific crucifixions in the history of art. Jesus is shown, and if we get a close-up, you can see that his skin is very stressed. And this shows the kind of marks that the people that have ergot poisoning, which causes itching, it's a burning sensation. And so the people who were suffering through this, when they went to Mass, they would see Jesus suffering from the same sort of disease that they themselves were suffering with. So it made them feel like their suffering was not entirely in vain, because Jesus knows this level of suffering. And it is the most abject crucifixion, I think, in the history of art. Look at the hands, the way they're pounded in, and the expressive distortion of the hand. And one, I just can't help thinking of German expressionistic painting, the way it's pinioned there. It's an incredible evocation of despair and hopelessness with this black sky, even though it's the afternoon. His mother Mary, dressed kind of as a nun, seems to almost faint away in the arms of the only disciple that didn't abandon him during the crucifixion, St. John. And Mary Magdalene, his female disciple, kneels at the foot of the cross, gazes at his tortured face, and look at those hands. It's absolutely incredible. The nervous sort of brushwork that is in the hands also continues into the sleeves of the garment and her face, and her whole body becomes like this wringing, wash rag that's just beyond hope in desperation. To his right, we find John the Baptist, and that's kind of incongruous because John the Baptist dies at the beginning of Jesus's career. He baptized Jesus, but then shortly afterwards, we're told, he's arrested by Herod, the evil king, and beheaded. And so here he is at the crucifixion, but saying, this is the Lamb of God. And he points with that, again, that incredible enlarged finger. And it says there, in Latin, behold the Lamb of God. And at his feet is actually a lamb. And the lamb is bleeding into a chalice, which represents the blood of Christ. Now, I want you to notice also the distortions in scale. The more important things are, the larger they are. So Jesus is gigantic on his cross. Next in the hierarchy of things comes John and the mother and John the Baptist. And then on an even smaller scale is Mary Magdalene. So everyone is kind of in their place, small or large, not because of perspective, but because of their importance or unimportance or marginality in the drama that's being enacted. In the predella below is shown Christ's dead body being lowered into the tomb. amidst the pain and agony of the mother and John. Very expressionistic, very beautiful. And what happens is that this opens up. There's a hinge in the center, and you can kind of see the line right here. You see that's a line, a hinge, and it opens up, and inside are these happy, joyful scenes, an annunciation, an angel sing a choir. But what I really want to show you here is this resurrection of Christ, which I think can hold its own against Raphael or Titian or any of the Italian masters, but yet it is so different. Jesus rises from the dead, glorious. His hands are like rubies. The color is all the colors of the rainbow. He shows off his hands, the wounds in his hands, which are now his stigmata of glory. His face is so brilliantly the source of light that it's like looking at the sun. And you squint, you can't quite make out everything. He's so radiantly filled with light. And he creates a nimbus around him that includes the colors of the rainbow. And if we look down below, we see the confounded Roman soldiers now look more like medieval German knights, but they have fallen asleep as Jesus wakes up, fallen asleep and in terror. And Jesus, in this moment of glory, just bursts out of the tomb of his own free will. His garments are particularly lofty, as if they're just being borne up by a great wind, like a parachute unfurling or something like that. It's a very, very powerful thing. Now you gotta stay down. That's the cat. Yeah, this is an incredible crucifixion. And I think, like I said, that Raphael's Transfiguration, Titian's Assumption of the Virgin, around the same time, but there's probably no chance whatsoever that Matthias Grunewald had seen those Italian masterpieces. We don't have any record of him ever leaving Germany. Some of these masters were provincial masters, but we can see, for example, in this 20th century painting by Emil Nolde, the German expressionist from 1910, 1911, The Last Supper, the same sort of expressive distortion takes place in the figures. And it's also a German artist. Or the French artist, Rouault, Georges Rouault, one of the foremost Christian painters of the early 20th century. And this Man of Sorrows, you can see here too, Rouault's training as his initial training in the early 20th century was in stained glass. And he brings that sensibility and that darkness that surrounds the brilliant color, so that it looks almost like as if it's lit from behind. It really, really would make wonderful stained glass. Well, so this is the milieu into which people said, wait a minute, Matthias Grunewald, he's not just some hinterland provincial, he's an expressionist 500 years before Expressionism. So he was catapulted to international prominence and is now figures in all the art history books as a great master of this period of the Renaissance. When we open the final doors, the final panels, we see a sculpture, not by Grunewald, I forget who did the sculpture, but that is St. Anthony, whose relics were there. Below is a Last Supper. But I want to call attention to these two side panels, which aren't by Grunewald. This one being St. Anthony, and this is not the familiar St. Anthony that we think of, the Italian saint with the baby Jesus, that that popular saint from not that Anthony, Anthony of Egypt, one of the early desert fathers. In the first centuries of Christianity, some hermits went out into the wilderness in Egypt and there to merge with God and to give up the vices of the flesh. And so St. Anthony is here visiting another one of the Desert Fathers. And this Desert Father is fed by ravens, just like Elijah in the Old Testament. And this day, the raven always brings one loaf, but she seems to have known somehow that St. Anthony would be visiting. And so 2 loaves of bread are brought. And you can see the raven is up here with his 2 loaves of bread that feed the hermit and his. But I also want you to call attention to the background, the landscape. We don't have these sort of rich landscapes in Italian art. It's cursory landscapes in the background. Here, they seem really deep and expressive and almost romantic, and suggest the harshness and the strangeness of the wilderness that these hermits live their life among. And also here is a doe that is a symbol of the saint. Okay, so on the other panel, we have St. Anthony assailed by demons. St. Anthony, it is said, endured, like Job, right, all the temptations of the devil. And so he shows St. Anthony here as the patron saint of the church, of the shrine, right, the Isenheim, is shown being attacked by demons that come right out of Bosch. You can see the same kind of visual language of these mutant, strange, fantastical, phantasmagoric creatures all descending on the poor saint. While, and the lovely alpine background, right? And way up in the clouds is God with his white beard, holding a scepter, surrounded in glory, looking down from afar. But I don't have much faith that this far away God is going to be able to have much effect on the kind of demonic world that lies below. And you can see even at the top of the little shelter here that the hermit has made in the wilderness is populated by all sorts of horrible demonic lizards and winged bat creatures and little demons. And God is just way, 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 way up there, away from everything. Well, this is kind of the mindset of these northern countries. At the same time that the Renaissance was enjoying a revival of ancient classical thought, while Franciscan humanism warmed up their idea of nature as being a bounteous Garden of Eden for us, if only we would recognize its beauty. And despite the entry of sin and evil onto the scene, nonetheless, a hopeful and optimistic idea of the future. Well, this Italian vision of the future, this Christian humanism, was certainly not shared by the artists that we saw today, who seem convinced that human beings are beyond help, that left to their own natural devices, they will descend into a moral depravity that leads ultimately to death and damnation. Well, on that happy note, let's open it up for questions.
Hello, Dennis, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. I have a question about the very, very first image that you showed us of kind of that 3-card Monte kind of thing that was going on with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What is the title of that work? And do you know where it is?
That's The Magician.